This is WeatherBrains episode number 832. This is for Monday, December the 27th. But our little secret is the fact that we're actually recording this show on Christmas Eve. It is 8:05 a.m. Central Time, Christmas Eve, as we're doing this recording here. So I'll be on vacation. That's the reason I'm doing this early, but it's going to be a really, really fun show. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us. It'll be a little different this evening. We're not going to do a lot of the typical segments. We're just going to talk for a few minutes, and we're going to have something really cool going on here. But I see some guests. Kim, would you please introduce your guest, please?
Sure. Oh, and I'm sorry, I just realized I was unmuted for her introducing herself in the pre-show back there. But she is Lily McLean, my 1-year-old, and she's having a wonderful morning. So we might be a brief appearance here, but it's great to see you all. Oh, yeah. Oh,
hey. Yes.
Thank you.
Oh, look
Well,
this
she is so stinking cute.
Oh my goodness.
This
star
is
is
good.
born.
Absolutely. Well, WeatherBrains 832. Mark it down. That was the start of her career. Neil, I saw you had some special guests in your studio there.
Say hey. Yeah, they're
back.
playing Legos. I don't know if I can.
Legos?
Hey. Yeah.
Not Legos.
It's total chaos over here at my house.
What is this thing? So what exactly is this? If it's not Legos, what is this?
Some kind of helicopter or something?
Yeah.
It's Connects, I think.
Yeah.
Leave it to Dr. Neil to have STEM toys. That's good stuff.
We have a room full of engineers in the room here. Uh-huh.
Supposed to be on ground looking like this, but I'm not totally finished with it.
Cool.
It is coming along.
This is outstanding. All right, let's see who else we got on the show. I see Troy Kimmel from Austin, Texas. Troy, Merry Christmas to you. How are you?
Merry Christmas to you, James, and to everyone else on the show. And again, kind of going into the Christmas season, even as we had this on our Monday evening, temperatures continue to be above average out here. It's amazing how much of this country is cooking for in more ways than one for Christmas.
Oh, this is too good. This is too good. So let's see, Jen, where's your cat?
I think she's downstairs laying on the heating vent. That's where she is. A little cold this morning, but it's going to warm up here too. We're supposed to be well above average in the 50s in Ohio. No white Christmas for us, and a little rain though. But I'm trying to get through my radio work this morning, and then the holiday lands on a Friday Christmas or Friday Saturday, and I can actually take a little bit of time off. So I'm excited about that. That's what I'm doing here.
Awesome. People always send me their Christmas critter pictures this time of the year. This cat wants nothing to do with that thing. For those watching,
No.
so it's a cat wearing some type of Christmas outfit, and that's just not working. I think the best one I saw yesterday was this one, this little calf here. That mooed off the red antlered cow deer.
That's cute.
Yeah, and then we had rabbits and we had chickens, and the animals are doing their best to get involved in this thing here. But anyway, so
Super cute.
So again, it's a special show. We're not going to do a lot of talking here, but it is. And by the way, for those of you watching live on YouTube, it is Christmas Eve. We're rolling this live at 7:00 Christmas Eve. And we thank you for watching live. And we know that most of you listen, and we've got something really special that's coming up here. But real quickly, in terms of the weather, it's a tale of two countries here. It looks like our friends in the Northwest are going in the deep freeze, Troy. I mean, it's brutal up there.
Yeah.
So Troy's in his tank top and flip-flops, by the way, for those of you listening.
Yep.
But up in Portland and Spokane and over into Montana and Idaho, it just looks brutal.
And it looks like long-term brutal too up there. It doesn't, this thing is not breaking loose like you kind of expect it to do. It kind of hangs in there from what I can tell.
Yeah, it's not going to move. And some places up there could stay below zero for goodness over 5 days. And and remember back in the Pacific Northwest, how hot were they back in the summer?
Yeah,
So they've had quite a year of extremes up there. But yeah, Bill Murray. We're down here in the like Troy, we're down here in the sauna. Bill's in his tank top and flip flops. And by the way, it's not a good look when any of us on this show go into tank tops and flip flops.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I tell you what, James, the one thing about being a meteorologist and loving travel is you can at least look out 2 weeks and go, where would I like to be on Christmas Day? So we're going to escape to the beach, because even 2 weeks ago, you were seeing this trend toward, way warmer than normal along the Gulf Coast. So we're going to take advantage of it tomorrow and head south.
Good. Okay. Well, anybody got anything before we start the actual special content here? Dr. Jacobs, you got any notes on the weather going on across the continental United States right now?
There's a ridge over Alaska that is just so large. I don't know how big it is because it went off the color scheme gradient. But I feel like that's pushing the trough, which is in doing the ridge over here. And we've got a pretty strong southwest flow, so it's going to be clear and dry with highs in the 60s.
Yep. High amplitude means some folks going to be awfully warm. Here, down here in the deep south, we're going to be over 70 on Christmas Day, which again, we're recording this Christmas Eve, and we've done that 10 times since 1900. But it's going to be pretty much. I remember as a kid, Bill was nobody here was alive. I don't think Bill was alive. 1964, Christmas Eve. It was 77 here.
Really?
And it was awesome. I mean, it was just the greatest thing for kids. I mean, I know that most adults like for it to be cold and Christmassy, but anyway, it's going to be one of these mild Christmas days. So, Bill Murray,
I think it's interesting too as we wrap up, because we're not going to be back really back until the new year, is what December is going to look like at many places in the Plains States, Southern Plains, as far as records. I know in Austin, at least at our sites here, we're thinking it'll either be the warmest on history, December, or it'll be the second warmest. So I think we're going to find that a lot of places when we go back and look at the December numbers.
And I will say one thing before we go to Bill and set this thing up. The analog to me, and I love analogs. I think looking at weather in the past is a valid way of looking at what might happen in the future. So the good analog to me when you're looking at December this year is December of 1984. And again, most people on this show are not alive in December of 1984. I was in Dallas, Texas, Channel 4 News with Clarice Tinsley, Steve Bosch, James Spann, and Paul Crane with sports. So I remember it well, and it was extremely mild, much like this. We had this high amplitude kind of blocked pattern, and then the dam broke in January, the next month, January of 85. Oh, Troy, I remember January of 85.
I'm pretty sure that in that I remember January that year that we had snow here in Austin with thunderstorms. So we actually had snow here in Austin that year. So
yeah, we had a sub-zero event here in Birmingham, to 2 or 3 below zero.
I think it was six below. I think it was six below here.
Yeah. It was cold.
And again, I was in Dallas at the time, and they put me out on Stimmons for the morning show because the CBS Morning News wanted a live from Dallas, and they said, "Well, do it for CBS and do it for us." And so I was out there on Stimmons. Literally, my eyeballs were frozen. I was like the Christmas vacation girl.
Yeah,
that was as cold as I've ever been in my life, and we had to stay out there for like 3 hours. And I'm, listen, I'm not saying it's going to happen in, January of 2022, but I'm just saying at some point that dam will break.
Yeah.
So
Bill
Murray, Bill Murray set us up here. Talk about what's going to happen here.
Yeah, James, we got a special treat for everyone today. Listener Janet L. Chestnut, who lives in Nashville, wrote us back in October, and she said, I lived in Birmingham from 1994 till 2005. And I followed James Spann, of course, for bad weather. And she said, we moved to Wisconsin in 2011. I was holding the phone up to my computer so that my son in Birmingham, who didn't have power, could hear James's broadcast live. And she said, I distinctly remember James saying, if you live in Western Birmingham, you may see insulation falling from the sky. And she said her son said a few minutes later, Mom, there is pink stuff falling out of the sky. And so James has had an influence on her family's life, but she grew up in the Midwest and she loved weather. She has written a set of 6 stories. And the first one is, they're all from the perspective of the narrator, Joe L. Carter. They're about a woman named Edna Miller. She had an idea that a radio station in the Midwest that was sort of, having a hard time serving just one county would benefit from having a weekly show, just where guests called in from around the county and told about the weather. And so she became the glue that held that community together. And she wanted to give this story to the WeatherBrains listeners as a gift. So we got famous Birmingham voice artist Ken Osborne to read the story. And so you have a really professional voice reading this really fun and heartwarming story that I think we'll enjoy for years to come. So now Ken Osborne brings you Janet L. Chestnut's The Weather Lady.
Christmas Eve with the Weather Lady by Janet L. Chestnut, as told by Joe Carter. Every Christmas Eve, the folks from my farming community gather for a Christmas Eve service to remember the birth of the infant king, born many centuries ago. The service, as it is known in the community, has been a tradition for many years, a tradition attributed to Edna Miller and the great Christmas Eve blizzard of 1962. In my childhood, Edna Miller was the weather lady at the local radio station, KPLN. She worked in radio at a time when news was obtained on the hour from the radio, or through the twice-a-week local newspaper, or the evening national news on TV. However, TV reception came through an antenna on your roof, and only 2 regional stations had a signal strong enough to reach our town. It was an era in which all telephones had cords and rotary dials, and many of the folks living in the country shared their phone line with their neighbors through a party line. KPLN 1530 on your dial served the residents of the county. K-Plane on the Plains was the simple motto of this radio station, which only had a signal strong enough to broadcast a radius of some 25 miles. It sounded more impressive to say the broadcast area covered some 1,962 square miles, or, to put it in the vernacular of the community, 1,255,680 acres. When a farming accident resulted in the death of Edna's husband, she found herself a premature widow at the age of 59. Her children were grown and had young families of their own. 1 year after her husband's death, Edna was still grieving and looking for a new purpose in life. Then she had an idea she later described somewhat hesitantly as a sort of epiphany. Edna made a visit to the station manager of KPLN and proposed her idea of a daily radio show to talk about the weather. "Why?" he asked. She returned his question. "Why?" She was astounded he even had to ask such a thing. "Because that's about all the conversational skills we have. Why do you think the good Lord gave us weather?" She answered her own question. "So we Midwesterners would have something to talk about." "What are you going to say after you've given the weather?" "That will take about 20 seconds, maybe 45 seconds max." She explained her plan. "I'm not just going to be giving the weather. Our listeners are going to be calling in the weather, their weather, on air." Now, talk radio was in its infancy and certainly was unknown to the KPLN listening audience. The station manager was doubtful. "We have a pretty small listening area. You think the weather is going to vary throughout the county?" "Yep," she answered without explanation. "I've thought of a name for my new call-in show, The Weather Lady." In her mind, it was a done deal. Edna was not aware of the station manager's struggle to have interesting programming that generated income from advertisers before the 11 o'clock agriculture hour. The Farm Report, a feed picked up from the largest radio station in the state, was broadcast from 11 to noon, and it was the most listened-to program. The station manager provisionally allowed Edna to create her job and her new radio program, The Weather Lady, Monday through Friday from 9:30 to 11, though he had no earthly idea how one could talk about the weather for an hour and a half. He offered her a 2-week trial run with the requirement that he had to see income from advertising sponsors by the end of the 2 weeks. He did not tell her the bank account was in the red. The Weather Lady's first broadcast could not have come at a better time. That is, a better time for launching a new radio program on weather. It was tornado season on the plains. The first broadcast followed a night of terrific thunderstorms. Raymond Douglas called in on air to report that 2 old outbuildings on his abandoned homestead were no longer standing. He suspected a small tornado. The Weather Lady made further inquiries and confirmed that the outbuildings were about to fall in on their own anyway, and the telltale sign of a tornado with twisted trees was not present because there were no trees. But clearly, a weather event had occurred on his farm. Soon other listeners were calling in with their storm damage reports and rainfall measurements from their rain gauges. The first show was a success. This single broadcast may have been the advent of talk radio out on the plains. The news from the Weather Lady's show was much better than the twice-weekly local paper. Edna's news was up to date and at times entertaining. In the post office and the grocery store, folks would greet each other with, "I heard you on the Weather Lady," and the parties would continue a discussion about the weather. Getting on the radio was a little like getting on TV is today. You get a little notoriety. Now Edna began each show by giving the forecast for the day, and then she repeated the previous day's forecast and weather outcomes. She had always been frustrated that weather reporting never included an assessment of whether the weather outcome matched the prediction. Of course, she kept a record book of weather forecasts and outcomes. Her listeners were confused at first because she was reporting 2 days of forecasts, of which one day had already occurred. But they soon got used to her personal style. She was a woman ahead of her time. The Weather Lady was generally ready to take calls at 9:34. Sometimes callers needed some prompting in reporting their weather. Edna kept a list of questions handy. Where were you when the storm hit? What did the storm sound like? How large was the hail? How deep is the snow? Have you observed any property damage? What effect do you think this storm, or the drought, will have on your crops? Edna soon recognized she needed some regular filler pieces, especially on those days when it was just a beautiful day on the plains with clear blue skies, a wind with an occasional cumulus cloud, and no rain in the forecast. Now, in some parts of the country, the day might be described as breezy, but one does not talk about a breeze on the plains. It is a wind. Edna's first filler piece she called From the Farmer's Almanac. This was a favorite of those farmers who grew up reading the Farmer's Almanac for their weather predictions. The secret methods of forecasting weather events so far in advance had never been disclosed. She would read word for word the weather for the day for our geographical region. Now, since the almanac grouped days together in their forecasts, she would read the same prediction a few days in a row. Some days she sounded as if she knew the secret formulas for predicting weather. Listeners were always delighted when the almanac got the forecast right. She tried reporting on weather outside our region, but there was little interest in a tropical depression out in the Atlantic, or the humidity in Charleston, South Carolina. So she decided to keep her reporting local. Of interest to any farming community was remembering what the weather was the previous year. Edna's segment, This Day in Weather, gave the historical facts of weather with average and high and low temps, and recalling any memorable event that had occurred on that day in history. She liked to educate her audience on the science of weather by reading from a book on meteorology she had on permanent loan from the county library. Reading a science book on air led Edna to introduce a little culture on her show with Weather from the Bookshelf. This was her literary contribution, and, of course, the county library becoming a sponsor. She read excerpts from literature that had a weather event as part of the plot. Soon people were calling in book titles with page numbers, but only Edna read on the air. The local co-op became a show sponsor after Edna allowed the farmers to call in their planting and harvesting reports. She realized her show might be appropriate for sharing gardening tips and information. Clifford Thompson, the county extension agent, was quite pleased and proud to offer his printed resources to the Weather Lady. She read select portions from his brochures and regularly gave him recognition. If you have any questions, go talk to Clifford down at the county extension office. In the spring, she had Clifford in the studio to take on-air gardening calls, and then again later in the summer when gardens were encountering pest problems. The county extension office became a regular sponsor of the show, too. The Weather Lady probably saved KPLN from going under. Her show became the most listened-to program across all age groups and kept the radio station in the black after the station manager increased the advertising rates due to the show's popularity. Edna had become a local celebrity and now had daily purpose in her life. Even though she was on air just 1.5 hours a day, 5 days a week, she often spent 3 hours prepping for each show. She had not realized how significant weather really was until she had become the Weather Lady. Now, Christmas was on a Thursday, the year of the great Christmas Eve blizzard. The school had dismissed for a 2-week Christmas break, and Edna had planned to start reading excerpts to the listening children on Monday, December 22nd, from Laura Ingalls Wilder's book, The Long Winter. It was a book she had read to her own children years earlier. But on Monday, Edna only had time to read a portion of her planned reading because of a significant weather event developing, and callers wanted to talk about it. There were concerns about a storm system over the Rockies, moisture from the Gulf being pulled into the region, and the anticipation of the collision of moisture with Arctic air coming down from Canada. It was a very scientific discussion. Then, on Tuesday, December 23rd, Edna opened the show with a forecast of a blizzard that was expected to hit on Christmas Eve, a blizzard that had been predicted in the Farmer's Almanac. A young caller asked how deep the snowdrifts might get. This led to several young callers asking the same question, and the Weather Lady politely answered each a little differently to make it sound like she was conveying new information. Then Frank Venton called in and introduced a new topic of discussion by noting the change of behavior in the birds. He had refilled his bird feeder 2 times the previous 24 hours. The Weather Lady asked, "Frank, how often do you normally refill your bird feeder?" "Only every other day. These are prophetic behaviors heralding a significant weather event." Frank boldly proclaimed, "This blizzard is going to be a big one for sure." "Oh my," said the Weather Lady. Now, anyone who listened to the Weather Lady regularly knew that "oh my" was a statement of consternation by Edna. The remaining 45 minutes of the show, the callers reported in observations of their animals. There were reports of the behaviors of chickens, calves, one normally cantankerous goat that had become excessively cantankerous, not to mention the cats and dogs, and an increased number of dead mice found in traps. It was presumed that the mice were taking refuge indoors. "Folks," said the Weather Lady, "if this many mice are trying to get into your homes, you have convinced me this is going to be a big one." She never got to read from The Long Winter. A disappointed young girl called in late in the show to request that the Weather Lady spend more time reading the next day on Christmas Eve instead of talking about everyone's pets and mice. It was snowing when Edna woke up on Wednesday, December 24th. She had prepared a plate of Christmas cookies to take to the station. She feared she might be needed a little longer, so she packed a lunch of soup and some cheese and crackers. Measurable accumulation had occurred by the time she arrived at work a few minutes after 9, and the wind was picking up. The somewhat anxious but excited station manager greeted her. "Can you go on air early? People have been calling in the last 30 minutes. We'll call it a special Christmas Eve edition of the Weather Lady." "Oh, my," she said, as she handed him the plate of cookies and removed her scarf and coat. She put her lunch in the fridge and changed out of her snow boots into her shoes. Only one technician, the station manager, and Edna were on duty that day. Everyone else had the day off because the station had planned on playing Christmas music throughout the day, and there was no necessary business to conduct. At 9:17, she went on air. "Welcome to a special Christmas Eve edition of the Weather Lady," she announced. "Friends and neighbors, you don't need me to tell you what's going on outside. The Farmer's Almanac predicted this storm right on." There was one call after another reporting on the snow accumulation and wind and decreasing visibility. Then Edna received a call she was not prepared for from Shelley Fisher, who was in my first grade class. Her soft voice asked, Will the blizzard keep Santa from coming tonight?" Edna thought the child was about to cry, and Edna had no response. Silence. Now, silence is a real killer on a radio show. She frantically looked through the glass, separating her from the station manager, who was sitting at the control board with the technician. She mouthed, "What do I say?" as she raised her arms up with hands open wide. He mouthed back with the same urgency, "Say something." "Honey, are you there?" the weather lady asked. "Yes." The voice, as gentle as a little lamb, was heard on air throughout the county. "Honey, I'm going to check on this for you. You just stay on the phone, and the station manager's going to ask for your phone number, and I'll call you back as soon as I learn something, okay?" The little voice was a little more assured. "Thanks." It was all Edna could think of on the spot. She had been caught speechless for the first time as the weather lady. Several minutes later, Edna called Shelley Fisher back on air and reported that Santa might have to change his route, but he would make it that night. As you might expect, the same question was asked by several other young callers, and Edna changed her answer slightly with updates of Santa's location. She took a break from the calls to read a portion of The Long Winter, as she had promised the day before. The hour-and-a-half long show was almost over. During a recorded commercial break, the station manager approached Edna. "You've got to keep going. There are so many calls coming in." Edna did not have anything to do the rest of the day until her 7 o'clock Christmas Eve service at her church. At 10:57, Edna announced that the special Christmas Eve edition of The Weather Lady would continue after the news at the top of the hour. The weather had deteriorated significantly. The snow was quite heavy, and the wind was blowing fiercely, causing drifting and poor visibility. It was a blizzard. Edna continued reading from The Long Winter. She determined her listeners must have been enjoying the story because the calls became infrequent during the reading times. At 1 o'clock, Edna read a list of businesses that would be closing early. Then at 2:30, the Highway Patrol put barricades outside city limits, closing the highway to traffic leaving the town. Edna announced the closings of all the area highways. At 3:30, the first cancellation of a church Christmas Eve service was called in. Edna started making a list. Soon other calls came in, and with each cancellation, Edna repeated the growing list. By 4:30, every church had canceled its Christmas Eve service. Edna kept reading The Long Winter. Her voice was getting tired, but she did not want to go off the air with it being Christmas Eve and all the services canceled. And she was still receiving calls inquiring about Santa. "He'll be coming in from the southeast against a strong headwind," she confidently reported, "so Santa might be arriving a little later in the night compared to previous years." At 6:30, Amy Voss, age 8, called in and asked if she could sing her Christmas solo she was supposed to sing at her church's Christmas Eve service. "What a splendid idea!" exclaimed the weather lady. It was long remembered that the KPLN Christmas Eve service started with Amy Voss's a cappella solo. The Griffin twins, Mike and Mark, age 10, called in to recite the passage from the Gospel of Matthew they were supposed to deliver at their church's Christmas Eve program. After a little on-air argument about who should hold the phone receiver, one of the boys started. "Now, the birth of Jesus Christ took place in this way. When his mother Mary had been betrothed to Joseph, before they came together, she was found to be with child of the Holy Spirit." The boys continued reciting about the angel's visit to Joseph, announcing the fulfillment of the prophecy. "Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and his name shall be called Emmanuel, which means God with us." The radio audience called their neighbors to make sure they were listening to KPLN and the Christmas Eve service. I had been listening to the broadcast most of the day. My family stayed at the kitchen table after supper, listening to the radio. My mother was a little disappointed we did not have anything to contribute, but I was only 6 years old, and my twin brother and sister were 2. The Rogers family, a family with a reputation for being very musical, called in and sang The Little Drummer Boy, accompanied by Mrs. Rogers at the piano and 11-year-old Peter on his drum. About all you could hear on air was the drum. Edna encouraged her audience. I am sure we have some more church musicians out there. Soon, members of every church throughout the county were calling in to perform their musical numbers through the telephone. The organist from the Lutheran church had a console organ in her home. Her husband stretched the phone cord as far as he could into the living room, and she put the pedal to the floor for full volume as she played the Christmas prelude she had been practicing since October. "Beautiful!" exclaimed Edna. Her voice and strength were returning as the blizzard raged outside. The handbell choir director from the Baptist church created his own bells at home by filling glasses with water. He tapped the glasses with spoons and played Joy to the World in 2-part harmony. Then Edna put out a request for ministers. "Pastors and priests, could you please give us a message?" The Methodist church pastor called in first. His message focused on the census and the occasion of the trip to Bethlehem by Mary and Joseph. The Brethren church pastor, who filled a pulpit in my country church in a part-time capacity, chose for his meditation the shepherds keeping watch over their flock by night. Father Pat from the Catholic parish spoke of the Virgin Mary's humble submission and obedience. The calls were winding down about 8:30, and Edna was ready to bring the radio service to a close. She asked her listeners to get a candle for each member in their household and to be prepared to light the candles. "I want to recite a passage from Luke chapter 2 from the King James Version," she said. "Many of you know this, and I invite you to say the words with me." She recited from memory. "And she brought forth her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. And there were in the same country shepherds abiding in the field, keeping watch over their flock by night. And lo, the angel of the Lord came upon them, and the glory of the Lord shone round about them. And they were sore afraid. And the angel said unto them, Fear not, for behold, I bring you good tidings of great joy, which shall be to all people. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Saviour, which is Christ the Lord. And this shall be a sign unto you. Ye shall find the babe wrapped in swaddling clothes, lying in a manger. And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host, praising God and saying, Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill toward men." "And now, friends and neighbors," Edna said, "I invite you to light your Christmas candles and join me in singing Silent Night." Edna was not a member of her church choir, but she could sing from her heart. She sang a cappella over the airwaves.
Silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright, round yon Virgin Mother and Child. Holy infant, so tender and mild, sleep in heavenly peace, sleep in heavenly peace. Silent night, holy night, shepherds quake at the sight, glory streams from heaven afar, heavenly hosts sing Alleluia. Christ the Savior is born, Christ the the Savior is born.
There was a period of silence after she finished singing. Her voice was noted to have a little quiver as she spoke. Good night, my friends, and Merry Christmas from the Weather Lady and KPLN, K-Plane on the Plains. And that was the first ecumenical Christmas Eve service in my town. Edna, the station manager, and the technician were driven home by the one police officer who was on duty. His squad car was the only vehicle out that night. The following year was a dry one, and the plains had blowing dirt, not blowing snow. About Thanksgiving, the neighbors and the post office and the grocery store started remembering the last Christmas Eve. Wonder if we'll have another blizzard this year, they asked. Secretly, many wished to repeat their radio Christmas Eve service. One day a caller to the Weather Lady asked, Do you think we could get all our churches together for a Christmas Eve service this year? Within an hour, the callers had all agreed to the suggestion and even organized a cocoa and cookie reception. When the question was raised as to where the service should be held, the logical conclusion was the high school gym. It was the only place big enough. Edna instructed her audience to call their pastors and priests to inform them of the town's decision. Trying to avoid a conflict, Edna directed, Whichever pastor calls in first will give the message. The service continues to this day in the high school gym with participation from every congregation in the county. It is the only church service of the year when no one complains it is too long. The service ends with the a cappella singing of Silent Night as the flame of a candle is passed from one candle to the next, lighting up the high school gym. Then the community enjoys fellowship at the cocoa and cookie reception in the school cafeteria. One will hear many stories being retold of Edna Miller and her radio show, The Weather Lady, and the great Christmas Eve blizzard that resulted in the spontaneous KPLN radio Christmas Eve service.